Take her as payment for the debt. He refused at first, but when he looked at her, everything changed. The man who owned the office sat behind a wooden desk that had seen better days. His name was Daniel. He was known in the town as a strict but fair man. He lent money, helped businesses survive, and expected people to keep their word. He did not enjoy seeing others suffer, but he believed responsibility mattered. That afternoon, Daniel was already exhausted. It had been a long day of meetings, excuses, and broken promises. When the door opened again, he expected more of the same. Instead, an older man walked in slowly, his shoulders bent as if carrying an invisible weight. His clothes were clean but worn, and his face showed years of worry. This man was called Robert. Robert stood near the door for a moment, unsure if he should move forward. His hands shook slightly. Daniel noticed this right away. He had seen fear before, but this was deeper than fear. This was defeat. Daniel pointed to the chair across from him and told Robert to sit. Robert did, but he stayed on the edge of the chair, as if ready to stand and leave at any second. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The ticking of an old clock on the wall filled the silence. Finally, Daniel broke the quiet. He asked Robert why he had come. Robert took a deep breath. His voice was low and tired as he explained. Years ago, he had borrowed money to save his small repair shop. At first, things went well. Then sickness came. Medical bills grew. The shop lost customers. Tools were sold, machines stopped working, and slowly everything fell apart. Each time Robert thought things could not get worse, they did. He admitted he had missed payments. He admitted he had avoided calls. He admitted he had waited too long to face the truth. As he spoke, his voice cracked and he looked down at the floor. He was ashamed. Daniel listened without interrupting. He had heard many stories like this, but each one still carried its own pain. When Robert finished speaking, Daniel opened a folder on his desk. Inside were documents showing the debt clearly. The numbers were not small. This was not something that could be ignored or easily forgiven. Daniel asked Robert what he planned to do. Robert's hands tightened together. He shook his head slowly. He said he had sold everything he owned that had value. The shop was gone. The house was nearly gone. There was nothing left. No savings, no relatives who could help, no miracle waiting. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He felt the familiar conflict rise inside him. He believed in giving people chances, but he also believed in limits. If he forgave every debt, his own work would collapse. He told Robert honestly that he needed a solution. That was when Robert hesitated again. He looked toward the door. Daniel followed his eyes and noticed someone standing quietly just outside the office. Daniel had not seen her enter earlier. She had been waiting there the entire time. Robert stood up slowly and opened the door wider. A woman stepped inside. She was an adult, calm but clearly nervous. Her posture was straight, but her eyes showed worry. She wore simple clothes, neat but old. She looked like someone who worked hard and rarely complained. Daniel noticed something else too. She did not avoid eye contact. She was not hiding. She stood there with quiet strength, even though the situation was heavy. Robert introduced her. He explained that she was his daughter, Emily. She had been helping him since the shop failed. She worked long hours, took care of bills, and kept the family going when he could not. Without her, he said, they would have lost everything much sooner. Emily said nothing. She only nodded politely. The silence returned, but this time it was heavier. Robert swallowed hard and then spoke words he had clearly practiced, but hoped he would never have to say. He told Daniel that he knew his proposal was wrong, but desperation had pushed him to consider it. He said he was willing to offer anything he had left to settle the debt. Anything at all. Daniel frowned. He did not like where this was going. Robert continued, his voice shaking more now. He spoke about sacrifice, about doing whatever it took to protect his family from complete ruin. He said he had failed as a provider, and this was his final attempt to fix his mistakes. Daniel raised his hand slightly, signaling him to stop. His expression grew serious. He told Robert firmly that he would not accept anything that crossed moral lines. People were not objects. A debt was a debt, but dignity was not negotiable. Emily looked down briefly, then back up. She did not interrupt. She seemed prepared for whatever came next, but she did not speak for herself. Daniel stood up from his chair. His voice was controlled, but there was anger underneath it. He told Robert that desperation did not excuse losing one's sense of right and wrong. He said he understood fear, but he would not be part of something that caused deeper harm. Robert's shoulders collapsed. He nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. He said he expected that answer. Still, he had felt he had to ask. He apologized again and again, his voice breaking each time. Daniel walked toward the window, needing space to think. Outside, the street was busy. People passed by, each carrying their own problems, their own silent battles. He wondered how many of them were only one mistake away from sitting in that chair. He turned back toward the room, ready to end the meeting. That was when his eyes met Emily's again. This time he truly looked at her. He noticed the tired lines on her face, not from age, but from responsibility. He noticed her hands, rough from work. He noticed the way she stood close to her father, protective but respectful. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination mixed with worry. Daniel realized something in that moment. This situation was not just about money. It was about survival. It was about a family pushed to the edge by circumstances they could not fully control. He still rejected the proposal completely. That would not change, but something inside him shifted, not because of what was offered, but because of who was standing in front of him. Robert apologized one last time and moved toward the door, clearly expecting the conversation to end there. Emily followed, but before leaving, she paused. She thanked Daniel for listening. Her voice was calm and sincere. Daniel nodded, unable to speak right away. As the door closed behind them, Daniel returned to his desk and sat down slowly. He stared at the papers in front of him, but the numbers no longer felt like the main issue. His thoughts stayed on the moment he looked at her and realized that some debts were larger than money, and some decisions carried consequences far beyond contracts. The meeting was over, but the impact of it had only just begun. After the door closed behind Robert and Emily, the office felt unusually quiet. The ticking clock sounded louder than before, each second stretching longer than the last. Daniel sat still in his chair, his hands resting on the desk, his eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. But he was not really seeing the numbers anymore. His mind was somewhere else. He had refused the proposal clearly and firmly. There was no doubt about that. He believed he had done the right thing. Still, something about the meeting stayed with him. It was not the debt itself. He had dealt with larger debts and worse situations before. This felt different. Daniel leaned back and let out a slow breath. He reminded himself that emotions should not control decisions. Rules existed for a reason. If he allowed feelings to guide him, he could lose everything he had worked to build. His business depended on fairness and consistency. One exception could turn into many. He stood up and walked around the room, trying to shake the heavy thoughts. He poured himself a cup of coffee, though he was not thirsty. As he lifted the cup, he noticed his hand was tense. That annoyed him. He prided himself on being calm and steady. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. One of his assistants stepped in, asking if he was ready for the next meeting. Daniel nodded and told him to delay it by 10 minutes. He needed time. When he was alone again, Daniel went to the window and looked out at the street. Cars moved slowly. A man sold fruit at the corner. A woman hurried by, talking on her phone. Life continued as normal, unaware of the quiet struggles happening behind closed doors. Daniel thought about Robert's face when he spoke about losing his shop. He remembered the shame in his voice, the way he avoided eye contact. That kind of shame did not come from laziness or dishonesty. It came from trying and failing despite effort. Then his thoughts returned to Emily. He remembered how she stood quietly, not asking for pity, not demanding anything. She had not tried to defend the proposal or explain it away. She had simply been there, steady and present. Daniel told himself again that none of this changed the facts. A debt was owed. He could not pretend otherwise. Still, when the next client entered the office, Daniel found himself distracted. He listened, responded, and did his job, but his attention drifted. When the meeting ended, he realized he could barely remember what had been discussed. That was unusual for him. The rest of the day passed slowly. Each new conversation felt heavy. When evening came and the office finally emptied, Daniel stayed behind. He gathered his things but did not leave right away. Instead, he returned to Robert's file and opened it again. He read through the history carefully. Payments made on time in the early years, notes about the illness, requests for extensions that had been reasonable. There was no sign of dishonesty or careless spending. The collapse had been slow and painful, not sudden or reckless. Daniel closed the file and rested his elbows on the desk. He reminded himself that many people had sad stories. If he softened for one, where would it end? Yet another thought followed closely behind. Fairness did not always mean being harsh. Sometimes it meant understanding the full picture. That night, Daniel went home later than usual. Even there, the meeting followed him. As he ate dinner alone, he replayed the conversation in his mind. He remembered the moment he raised his hand and refused, the firmness in his voice. He remembered Robert's reaction, relief mixed with despair. Relief that he was not crossing a line, despair that there seemed to be no way forward. Daniel slept poorly. He woke up several times, his thoughts restless. By morning, he felt tired, not just in his body, but in his spirit. At the office the next day, Daniel tried to focus on routine. He answered emails, signed papers, reviewed accounts. Still, the image of Emily standing quietly by the door returned again and again. There had been no expectation in her eyes, only responsibility. Late in the morning, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. He asked his assistant to find public information about Robert's old shop and the work he had done in the past. He told himself it was just due diligence, nothing more. When the information came back, it confirmed what he already suspected. The shop had once been respected. Customers had trusted Robert. Reviews spoke of honesty, fair prices, and hard work. The illness had been the turning point. Daniel sat back and rubbed his forehead. This was not a man trying to escape responsibility. This was a man crushed by circumstances. Still, Daniel reminded himself again that his refusal stood. He would not change that. But refusing one thing did not mean refusing all possible solutions. Later that afternoon, Daniel left the office early and took a walk through the town. He rarely did this, but he needed clear air. As he walked, he noticed how many small businesses had closed over the years. Signs faded, windows covered. Each one represented effort, hope, and loss. He stopped near a small cafe and watched people inside. A young worker wiped tables, moving quickly and carefully. For a moment, Daniel thought of Emily. He wondered how many hours she worked, how much she carried without complaint. That thought made him uncomfortable. He did not like being emotionally pulled into situations. But he also did not like ignoring reality. By the time Daniel returned home, his thoughts had shifted. He was no longer thinking only as a creditor. He was thinking as a human being with power over another person's future. That realization came with weight. The next morning, Daniel returned to the office early. He reviewed his schedule and made a small change. He cleared a space later in the week. He did not label it. He just left it open. Throughout the day, he stayed firm in his dealings. He refused other requests that crossed lines. He maintained his rules, but inside his thinking continued to grow more complex. He realized something important. Refusing a wrong action was easy. Choosing the right alternative was harder. Daniel did not know yet what he would do. He only knew that the story was not finished. The look he had seen in Emily's eyes had challenged something deep inside him, his understanding of responsibility, power, and compassion. By the end of the day, Daniel accepted one clear truth. He had refused the proposal, and that refusal would never change. But what came next was still undecided. And whatever choice he made next would say more about who he was than any contract ever could. The open space in Daniel's schedule stayed empty for 2 days. Each time he looked at it, he felt a quiet pressure, like a question waiting for an answer. He told himself he was not planning anything specific. Still, he could not ignore the thought that some situations deserved more than a simple yes or no. On the third morning, Daniel arrived early again. The building was quiet, and the street outside was still waking up. He made coffee and sat at his desk, staring at the wall instead of the papers in front of him. His thoughts returned once more to the meeting with Robert and Emily. He tried to remember exactly when his perspective had changed. It was not when the proposal was made. That had only strengthened his refusal. It was later in the still moment when he truly looked at Emily and saw the weight she carried without complaint. Daniel had built his life on structure. Clear rules made the world feel manageable. But now he realized that structure alone could not explain everything. People lived between the lines of rules, not just inside them. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then set it down again. Reaching out felt like crossing an invisible line. He did not want to give false hope. Hope could be dangerous when there was nothing solid to offer. At the same time, doing nothing felt like a choice as well. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. The morning sun touched the building softly. He noticed how different everything looked in daylight. Problems that felt heavy at night sometimes seemed clearer when the day began. He returned to his desk and opened Robert's file again. This time, he read it not as a lender but as an observer of a life slowly unraveling. He imagined the repair shop when it was full of sound and purpose. He imagined Robert younger, stronger, proud of honest work. Then he imagined the illness, the fear, the slow loss of control. And then there was Emily. Daniel realized he knew very little about her beyond that one meeting. Still, the impression she left was strong. She had not spoken much, but when she did, her words were calm and thoughtful. She had thanked him for listening, not for forgiving. That mattered. By late morning, Daniel made a decision. It was not a full plan, just a step. He asked his assistant to contact Robert and ask if he could come in again, this time alone if he preferred. No promises were made. No explanations were given. When Robert received the message, his reaction was mixed. Hope and fear arrived together. He almost refused, afraid of another conversation that might end in disappointment. But in the end, he agreed. He had nothing left to lose. The meeting was scheduled for the open space Daniel had left in his calendar. When Robert arrived, he looked even more tired than before. The past days had not been easy. Worry had followed him everywhere. This time, Emily was not with him. That absence made the room feel different. Daniel invited Robert to sit. The atmosphere was less formal than before. Daniel did not open the file right away. Instead, he asked Robert how he was holding up. The simple question caught Robert off guard. He paused, then answered honestly. He said he was doing his best, but the uncertainty was heavy. He spoke about feeling like a burden, about watching his daughter carry responsibilities he wished he could handle himself. Daniel listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not judge, he let the words settle. When Robert finished, Daniel spoke slowly. He told Robert that he still stood by his refusal. Nothing about that would change. Robert nodded, accepting it. He had expected no less. Then Daniel said something Robert did not expect. He said that refusing a wrong solution did not mean refusing to look for a right one. Robert looked up, confusion and cautious hope in his eyes. Daniel explained that the debt remained, but the approach to it could change. He talked about time, structure, and possibility instead of pressure and final deadlines. He said he needed honesty and effort, not miracles. Robert listened closely, barely breathing. Daniel then asked about Emily. Not in a personal way, but about her work, her goals, and her plans. Robert hesitated at first, unsure what was appropriate to share. But Daniel reassured him that this was about understanding the full picture. Robert explained that Emily worked long hours at different places. She was capable and responsible. She had put her own plans on hold to support the family. She never complained, but he knew she was tired. Daniel nodded slowly. He had suspected as much. He made it clear that any opportunity offered to Emily would be her choice alone. No pressure, no connection to the debt itself. Robert felt a tight knot in his chest loosen slightly at those words. Daniel emphasized something important. He said dignity mattered. No one should feel trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Support should lift people up, not push them down. Robert's eyes filled with tears, but he held them back. He thanked Daniel not for solutions, but for respect. By the end of the meeting, nothing was signed. No final agreement was made, but something had changed. The conversation had shifted from desperation to possibility. After Robert left, Daniel sat quietly for a long time. He felt the weight of responsibility more clearly than ever. Power, he realized, was not just about control. It was about how choices affected lives. Later that day, Daniel arranged to meet Emily separately. He made sure the message was clear. There were no expectations. The meeting was optional. When Emily arrived, she carried herself the same way she had before, calm, respectful, and alert. Daniel invited her to sit and thanked her for coming. He spoke directly and honestly. He told her that he would never accept her as part of any payment. He said that idea had been refused completely and permanently. Emily nodded, relief passing briefly across her face. Daniel then explained why he had asked to speak with her. He said he had noticed her strength and responsibility. He said that sometimes life closed doors unfairly, and sometimes the right response was not punishment but opportunity. Emily listened quietly. She did not interrupt. She did not assume anything. Daniel offered her information, not promises. He spoke about training programs, stable work options, and ways to build a future without carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. He made it clear that any path she chose would be her own. For the first time, Emily spoke more freely. She thanked him not just for the offer, but for speaking to her directly, not through someone else. She said she wanted a future built on choice, not obligation. Daniel respected that answer. When the meeting ended, Emily left with information, not pressure. Robert left with structure, not fear. Daniel stayed behind again, thinking. He understood now that what had changed everything was not a single look, but what that look revealed. It showed him a truth he could no longer ignore, that rules mattered, but so did people. Part of the debt remained unpaid, but something far more important had begun to balance itself. And for Daniel, there was no turning back from that understanding. The days that followed were different from anything Daniel had experienced before. There was no sudden change, no dramatic moment that fixed everything at once. Instead, life began to move in small, careful steps, like someone learning how to walk again after a long fall. Robert returned to the office a week later. This time, he walked in with less fear and more focus. The deep shame that once bent his shoulders was still there, but it no longer completely controlled him. Daniel noticed the change right away. They sat together and talked through a new plan. It was not easy and it was not fast. Daniel explained every detail clearly. The debt would not disappear, but it would be managed in a way that allowed Robert to breathe. Smaller payments, more time, clear expectations, honest communication. Robert listened closely, asking questions, wanting to understand every part. He did not want kindness without responsibility. He wanted a chance to stand on his own feet again. When the agreement was finished, Robert signed with steady hands. He looked up and thanked Daniel. This time, his gratitude did not come from desperation. It came from respect. Emily's path moved forward more quietly. She reviewed the information Daniel had shared and took time to think. She spoke with her father, but the decision was hers alone. That mattered deeply to her. She chose a training program that fit her skills and interests. It was not an easy choice. It meant long days, learning new things, and stepping into an unfamiliar world. But it also meant something she had not felt in a long time, hope that belonged to her. On her first day, she woke up early, nervous but determined. She stood in front of the mirror for a moment, taking a deep breath. For the first time in years, she was not stepping into a role shaped only by survival. She was stepping toward a future shaped by choice. Daniel did not involve himself further than necessary. He checked in occasionally, not to control, but to ensure support was real and respectful. He believed help should never turn into pressure. As weeks passed, changes became visible. Robert found small, steady work using his skills. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. Each payment he made, no matter how small, restored a piece of his confidence. Emily grew stronger in her new routine. Learning challenged her, but she welcomed it. She discovered abilities she had never had time to notice before. The weight she had carried for so long began to feel lighter. Daniel watched all of this from a distance. He did not seek praise or recognition. In fact, he told no one about what he had done. For him, this was not about being seen as kind. It was about doing what felt right and living with that decision honestly. There were moments of doubt. Some nights, Daniel wondered if he had made things too easy. He questioned whether compassion could weaken structure. But each time those thoughts came, he reminded himself that responsibility and compassion did not cancel each other out. They worked best together. One afternoon, Daniel ran into Emily by chance near the cafe. She was tired but smiling. They exchanged a few polite words. Nothing more was needed. In that brief moment, Daniel saw something he had not seen before: peace. Robert later shared that the biggest change was not financial. It was emotional. He no longer felt invisible or discarded. Someone had seen his struggle and responded with fairness instead of judgment. That knowledge gave him strength on days when progress felt slow. Time continued to move forward. The debt slowly decreased. Emily advanced in her training. Life did not become perfect, but it became stable. And stability, Daniel realized, was often the most powerful gift of all. One evening, as Daniel closed his office, he paused and looked around. The same desk, the same clock, the same walls, yet he felt different. The man who once believed rules alone defined fairness now understood something deeper. He had not accepted a wrong solution. He had chosen a better one, and that choice had changed more than just one outcome. It had changed him. The story was not over yet, but the hardest part was behind them. What remained was effort, patience, and time. And sometimes that was enough. Time passed quietly, the way it often does when life begins to heal. There were no loud celebrations or sudden success stories. Instead, there were small signs of progress that only those involved truly noticed, and those signs mattered more than anything else. Robert continued working steadily. Some days were harder than others. His body was not as strong as it once was, and there were mornings when pain reminded him of the years he had lost. But now, when he woke up, he no longer felt crushed by hopelessness. He had a plan. He had direction. Each small payment he made felt like proof that he was moving forward, even if the steps were slow. He learned to forgive himself little by little. That was not easy. For a long time, he had blamed himself for everything that went wrong. Now he began to understand that failure did not erase effort. Mistakes did not cancel worth. This understanding did not come all at once. It came through work, routine, and quiet reflection. Emily's life also continued to change. Her training became more challenging as time went on. There were moments when she felt unsure, moments when she wondered if she was capable enough. But each time doubt appeared, she reminded herself how far she had already come. She was no longer living only to survive. She was learning, growing, and shaping her own future. The pride she felt was not loud or dramatic. It was steady and deep. It came from knowing that her choices were her own. Daniel watched all of this without stepping into the center of it. He believed that true help did not demand attention. He remained firm in his work, fair in his decisions, and careful not to let one choice turn into reckless behavior. Yet something inside him had clearly changed. He found himself listening more closely to people's stories. Not every situation deserved special treatment, but every person deserved to be heard. He no longer saw cases as only numbers on paper. He saw them as lives intersecting with systems that did not always bend easily. One evening, long after closing time, Daniel sat alone in his office. The same ticking clock marked the seconds, just as it always had. He looked around and realized how much meaning one moment could carry. If he had walked away that day without truly seeing what stood in front of him, everything would have unfolded differently. He understood now that power came with responsibility, not just authority. Being able to say no was important. But knowing when to offer another path was just as important. Months later, Robert walked into the office again. This time, his posture was upright. He smiled easily. He had come to make another payment, but also to say thank you, not out of obligation, but from the heart. He told Daniel that his relationship with his daughter had changed for the better. They talked more openly now. They respected each other's boundaries. The weight they once carried together had become lighter because it was no longer shaped by fear. Emily later shared that she had completed a major step in her training. She spoke with confidence, not because life was perfect, but because she trusted herself. She had learned that asking for help did not mean losing dignity. It meant choosing growth. Daniel listened, nodded, and wished her well. He did not take credit. He did not need to. As time moved forward, the debt continued to shrink. It was not erased overnight, but it was no longer a shadow hanging over their lives. It had become part of a journey, not a punishment. Daniel realized that what had truly been exchanged that day long ago was not money for time or obligation for relief. It was perspective. Robert had regained belief in himself. Emily had regained ownership of her future, and Daniel had gained a deeper understanding of fairness. He learned that strictness without compassion could break people. Compassion without structure could also fail, but when the two worked together, something lasting could be built. There were other difficult cases after that. Not all ended well. Not all could be helped in the same way. Daniel accepted that. He knew he could not save everyone, but he also knew that choosing humanity when possible mattered more than protecting comfort. One afternoon, Daniel passed the cafe again. He saw Emily inside, laughing with coworkers during a break. The sound was light and real. He did not interrupt. He simply continued walking, carrying that moment with him. Robert later opened a small workspace of his own, nothing large, nothing risky. Just enough to do what he loved again. His hands, once shaking from fear, now moved with purpose. Years later, when Daniel thought back on that first meeting, he no longer remembered it as a moment of shock or discomfort. He remembered it as a turning point. Not because of what was offered, but because of what he chose to see. Sometimes, life places a difficult question in front of us without warning. The answer we give does not just shape the moment, it shapes who we become afterward. Daniel knew that day had changed him. And he was at peace with that. The story did not end with wealth or dramatic success. It ended with dignity, growth, and quiet strength, and for all of them that was more than enough.